As we await the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, questions are being asked about how effective it will be against what seem to be new variants of the virus. Aisha Abdool Karim from the Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism joins us now to explain the origins of these new variants and their impact. Aisha, good afternoon to you. Let's just start with this. What is the scientific definition? I presume there is a textbook definition of what a variant is compared to what a virus is.
Yeah, so essentially why it's called a variant is just that there have been small changes to the structure of the virus. And these things are called mutations, and it basically just alters certain parts of the virus's structure, and that has consequences. And it's called a variant simply because we don't yet know the extent of these changes or how to classify them. So it's not classified as, like, for instance, a different strain of the virus or a subtype of the virus like we see in HIV, and it's just being called a variant because it's some small changes have happened, and we're trying to assess the extent to which those changes adjust how the virus is classified. So that's basically what it means, that there's just been some alterations to how this virus functions.
As I understand it, this is what viruses do. They do actually mutate. But in this case, what makes it slightly, worrying is that it seems to have mutated in a way that makes it better able to transmit itself from human to human. This seems to be quite a significant change.
Yeah, so basically what makes the mutations such cause for concern is because, as you've said, there are mutations and changes that have been happening in the virus slowly over time, as happens with all viruses, because it's sort of like an evolutionary imperative that viruses need to change and adapt in order to better survive, because that's their goal. They want to keep being spread within a community. And so what we were seeing in this particular coronavirus was very small, insignificant changes, maybe one change a month. And then these variants that we're seeing now, the ones that were identified in the United Kingdom, Brazil, and here in South Africa, are unusual. First, because of the high number of mutations we're seeing. The one that we've got circulating in South Africa at the moment has over 20 mutations, which is, a rapid change that we weren't really expecting to see from this coronavirus. And then secondly, what makes them important is that they happen on a very key part of the virus. So the point at which the virus attaches itself onto human cells has basically been altered with some of these mutations in a way that allows it to attach itself better and stick. So because the virus is able to bind itself sort of more strongly to human cells, it's able to firstly transmit much faster, and that's why it's spreading so wide. And then there are also some other things that we're noticing as a result of these changes, mainly by way of how these changes are adapting how the variants of the virus are interacting with antibodies. And so that's why these changes are something that need to be looked at very closely, because it's not just small things that have been altered along the way. These are several significant changes that are altering the way that the virus firstly spreads within society, but then also interacts with the human body if people do get infected with the new variant.
Obviously we're now hoping that there'll be a rollout of the coronavirus vaccine, but the coronavirus vaccines, all of them as far as I know, were actually developed to respond to the first variant of the virus, the first wave of the virus, if you like. Do we know if this new variant, 501YV2, is going to, if the vaccines will work against this variant?
Yeah, so I think it's a very important question, and it's definitely something that scientists and researchers are looking at to answer as quickly as possible. But it's also an incredibly complicated question because of how your immune system works. There are basically two arms to how your immune system will respond to an invader, such as the coronavirus. So antibodies is the one half of that. And then there's another part of the immune system, which is like your killer T cells is what they're called. And those will kill infected cells directly, as opposed to antibodies which fight off the virus. So we have very early research looking at how the virus is able to kind of evade and escape antibodies generated by the the previous version of the coronavirus that was circulating, and that version is also what the vaccines are based on. But we don't yet know how T cells are going to interact with this variant. And also, we're still waiting on results from research that's underway to study how vaccine-induced immunity is going to work against the variants, because basically how your body is going to respond to a virus is different to what we're currently seeing being studied in labs. So it's very complicated, and it's very important that we do answer this question about what these variants mean for the efficacy of vaccines. But unfortunately, at this stage, it's just too early for us to know for sure what the effects are going to be.
I mean, there'll obviously be a question around whether this should change our vaccine rollout strategy.
Yeah, so I think it is something that the Department of Health and the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Vaccines is having to keep an eye on, because as we learn more about the variant, it may well require an adjustment of our strategy. At this point, the strategy remains unchanged. But if, for instance, in a few months' time or in a month's time, we get new research that shows that the vaccines offer less protection against the variant, we may need to then update the current vaccines that we have, and that will require, waiting until the vaccines are ready and then having to organize a second rollout in the country, because at that point, that information will likely only emerge after we've already begun our vaccine rollout locally.
Aisha Abdool Karim, thank you very much indeed, of course, from the Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism.